Reconciliation Rising is funded in part by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and brought to you by Kevin Aberesk, Margaret Jacobs, Gabby Mace, and Dalen Zagurski. Due to federal Indian policies, the small Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska lost nearly all of its land, and many of its 4,000 tribal citizens moved far away from their homelands in the late 20th century. Lance Foster returned home in 2013 and eventually became his nation's Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and Vice Chair. He was instrumental in working with the Nature Conservancy to hand back a total of 444 acres to the tribe in 2018 and 2020. Now he's turning it into the second national park designed and run by a tribal nation.
Thank you so much for meeting with us, Lance. We appreciate it, and I want to thank you for your time. I know that's valuable.
Well, thanks for letting me be part of the conversation.
Well, we wanted to talk to you today just about what's going on with your tribe, the Iowa tribe, and the land exchange that occurred between the tribe and the Nature Conservancy, and kind of where that's headed, what your hopes are with that land exchange and the land that you've been donated by the Nature Conservancy. But first, I guess we just wanted to kind of get to know you and who you are and where you grew up and all of that, if you wouldn't mind just kind of starting there.
Sure. Well, our reservation, as you know, is pretty small, 12,000 acres, and we have something over 4,000 members scattered across the country. Only about 1/3 of the reservation is owned by the tribal members. As I understand, part of that was because of the allotment process, and so much was lost in the 1880s, 1890s, until the Burke Act of 1906, which really accelerated that as well. So I think that there's only was about 8 or 9 allotments still in the tribe's name, in tribal members' name there at one point. And so during 1936, part of the Indian Reorganization Act, they had some projects, like we're sitting in a stone building, which was one of those projects to make work, that the tribal members learned to be masons and quarry and everything. And also shelter belts were a big thing. But another thing was a thing called the Iowa Project of 1936. And what it did was, because so much land had been lost and Iowa tribal members couldn't compete with non-tribal folks for the rents to be able to do farming, they bought about 6 former allotments that were in the names of banks and things like that, and they called it the Iowa Project. And as part of that, those former allotments became what they called assignments, which they would assign to different tribal members to learn to farm and eventually maybe to save up enough to buy your own farm, and it would be like a small business incubator. It would be another start for the next tribal person. But like most things in life, once people have something, they don't like to let go of it, and all the politics of tribal country, how that works, families and this and that. So those assignments have been one part of what we have, trust lands that either we bought with casino money. We don't have any kind of per capita. What we do is we use the money for the roads and to develop the reservation as it is, and farm needs, stuff like that. So that has avoided, on the one hand, we're pretty rural and we're pretty small, so we're not a multi-million-dollar casino out in the middle of, the interstate. So we can't compete that way. But we're a little tucked away, kind of its own little world unto itself. So as part of that kind of losing all those lands, allotments and everything, a lot of people had to leave here to find jobs, and that was accelerated in World War II when people started finding what the big world was out there. Kansas City, Omaha, local areas, people would go there to get jobs. My own family moved out during the Depression out to California, and my grandpa got work out there in shipyards, and my grandmother liked it out there. It's very typical for a farm girl to go out to the big city and like the excitement and things that are going on out there. So my father was born here, but they moved out there when he was a baby, and then My mom and dad met there, and then I was born there, and we moved up to Montana when I was 5. So I was really raised in Montana among like the Northern Cheyenne and Blackfeet and Landless Chippewa Cree and those kind of folks. So I kind of knew that world. But my grandma would teach me a little bit of Iowa here and there, different words and stuff. And I always wanted to come back. So in my 20s, it was the last trip my grandpa and grandma came back. I drove them in my 20s back here in the 1980s. And we got to see the land. At that time, the land was different. They hadn't drained the bottomlands. The roads were all mud still, dust, dirt. And so it was a different world. And there was also cattails and marshes and stuff still. But since the 1980s until I came back here to live permanently in 2013, I had come back several times in the 1990s to do my archaeology and my graduate studies and visit and go to powwow and stuff. But I only moved here permanently in 2013 again, and a lot had changed. There weren't any bottomlands anymore. The river road was not shady and cool anymore. Everything had been changed, and every change brings good and bad. A good thing is that you didn't get stuck on the roads anymore in the mud, and the bad things is the temperature rose higher and higher, and it got sunnier and sunnier with all the trees cut down there. So, our tribe, we used to be big potters and traders pre-contact, and when the non-Indians came in with their guns, we kind of forgot how to make bows and arrows, or decided we wanted to go the other way instead, and the fur trade changed everything. And of course, we were big potters at one point, just like the Southwest. People think about pots in the Southwest, but the Midwest has a lot of pottery, ceramics and stuff. But, they break when you get horses and you go on horseback to go hunt buffalo. And those metal pots available for trade do a lot more, and they last those trips. So we ended up kind of changing over and not making pottery anymore. So you gain a better pot in that sense, but you lose the ability to make pottery as a tribe. They're individuals, still do little things here and there.
Can I pause you just for a moment?
Sure.
And what were you talking about? The pottery, I think?
Oh, I think you were asking kind of a little bit how we got here, how our reservation came to be, that kind of thing. So I'll tell you a little bit about our Aboriginal homelands and how our reservation came to be here. So the land that we call Iowa, the land between two rivers, Missouri and the Mississippi, we, in 1837, one of our chiefs, my direct ancestor, Nohart, had a map drawn, or he drew it, we don't know, but they call it the Nohart map. And he said this land has had our names in it from time immemorial. All the rivers, we named them. All the places, we named them. Other tribes, when they came in, they just did their translation of ours, and the non-Indians did the same. But this was all our land. He said, look, at the mouth of this river, there were our graves here. So the way we define land as ours is not only just ancestral connection, but that our graves and things were there. So we prehistorically, or pre-contact, we were traders in buffalo skins and pipestone and copper, and that was kind of our role in intertribal trade. We ranged all the way from the Minnesota River up in Minnesota down to the Missouri as it crosses across Missouri, the state of Missouri, and over into Illinois and into the middle part of Nebraska hunting buffalo. So we have lived in these areas since at least 900 or 1000 AD, at least, identifiable as us. Of course, tribes meld and they form and they split and they do all these things over time. And so there are different ways of knowing things. There's the tradition that talks about how all the different clans came together at a place called Red Bank, which is basically Green Bay, Wisconsin. But the clans had come from various places and joined there. And we have stories of mound building. We have stories of all those things. So, but our glory days are really just before non-Indians hit this area. Probably about 1100 to 1600 was about our height of population. And we have begun declining especially in the 1700s and after, till we were only about 150 people at a certain point.
Wow.
So we don't have a lot of folks in that sense.
Were you agriculturalists as well as
We were
traders and hunters?
We were kind of like, our way of life is very much like the Sac and Fox. So, or the Pawnee, or, we were travelers, we were horticulturalists, but we would go back and forth 2 or 3 times across for the buffalo hunts and be gone from the village and be, in the wintertime, go up and do mapling and fur trapping and stuff like that. So we kind of did both.
Mm-hmm.
And these are your ancestral homelands, this area?
Yeah, this, in fact, the Leary site, which is only a couple miles from here, it's a National Historic Landmark, and it was occupied most intensively from about 1200 to 1400, and the type of pottery and stuff is associated with our ancestors, the Oneota, especially the ore aspect. But this river, when Lewis and Clark came up, the Nemaha River, north of that was the Oto, Missouri, and south of that was the Kaw. So during the time of first contact, after 1400 or so, that's when the Kaw, and probably it was after the collapse of Cahokia, when most of the people who were the Yeehaw people, Osage and Omaha and Ponca and Kaw and Quapaw, kind of moved away from Cahokia and during that change in the 1400s and spread across the country to find kind of their own niches, right? So, yeah, so it is ancestral, but when you look at time, it's so deep that it's hard to say, was it 11,000 years ago? Because mythic time, the time that we think about in terms of ideas, and it's not the same necessarily as chronological in the sense of like 1852 and stuff like that. It becomes a mythic time the further back you go. Mm-hmm. And in our stories, we were animals who slowly became human beings in our stories. So we're not created human.
You mentioned you did a graduate degree. Was that in archaeology, you said?
It was anthropology,
Mm-hmm.
but because I'd worked the most in archaeology, I did my thesis on sacred bundles. Mm-hmm. So it was about material culture, about how language goes into that, how do you do a taxonomy based upon, how do you classify, different kinds of bundles, scalping bundles, and war bundles, doctoring bundles, and tattooing bundles, and all these things. So it was an exercise, kind of a cross-discipline kind of a thing.
Well, maybe we could talk about kind of how this land exchange came about with
Sure.
the Nature Conservancy.
Sure. Oh, I should probably give you that background on so from the years 1650 to about 1820, all the different tribes were moving across the country. It was almost like a domino effect where people would bump into each other, and the bigger tribe would take over and the smaller tribe would melt before them and go to another place, and eventually you find the niche that you can fit in, that you can hold on to. So our tribe was up in Pipestone until about 1720, and a place called Good Earth, which is where we got the pipe dance, and that's Good Earth State Park in South Dakota. And then we moved down along the Missouri River and across into southwestern Iowa, where a lot of the river names, Nishnabotna, Nottoway, all those are kind of based upon our names. And then starting after the War of 1812, 1815, that was our first treaties with the United States. And then one after the other, 1824, all the way down, we started ceding more and more land until 1836, when we ceded the last chunk of Missouri that we had, and they moved us across the river here to be sandwiched between the Great Nemaha Half-Breed Tract and to the north, and to the south, the Kickapoo Reservation. And the Iowas and Sac and Fox shared a reservation at first for about a year, and then they came in, surveyed it, and split it from 1837 on. And then we lost land in 1854 and 1861, and so the reservation we have now is the after 1861 version.
Was there ever an attempt to remove the tribe, to Oklahoma?
Yes, there was. Right after the Civil War, and actually it was going on before that, as soon as 1854, and you had the white squatters coming across trying to take reservation lands by hook or crook, and finding, especially 1857 on, when it was really being settled here, there was always a hue and cry to get those Indians off of this good land, that was meant for farming, although we farm too, but they wanted the land. And so it's always been like nibbled away like an ice cream cone, right? Bite by bite. So there was always the pressure. People were killed. There was a lot of the same kind of things that were going on with other tribes about decimation and murder and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. We were getting whittled away pretty badly. The big change probably happened in the Civil War of 1861 to 1865 because almost all the adult men went away and served on the side of the North. And like most wars, when men come home from war, their minds have been changed for various reasons, and they saw that this was not going to stop, that they were going to continue to want our land. And so there began a huge discussion in the tribe about whether, like almost all the other tribes in Kansas who were getting pushed down to Indian Territory, which became Oklahoma, there was a discussion here. And there are only 4 of those tribes left that were here. There was 20-something tribes, I think, here at one point. And only the Iowa, the Sac and Fox, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi remain. For us, the split in the tribe happens in the 1870s. The conversation continued. The people up north that we are decided we wanted to stay with the allotment, and our attachment was more to the farm and to our burial grounds and things like that. The people who moved south, they wanted to live the old way, which was village-centered. The old ways, the hunting, the language. There was hardly any game up here left anymore. So there was a split, and about 2/3 stayed up here, 1/3 moved down there. And within 10 years after the Oklahoma land rush, they were allotted as well, and they couldn't live in that common way either. So that's kind of what happened.
The tribe was able to maintain a certain land base, though, throughout the years?
Yeah. Probably it was almost, the tribe itself didn't have any land as the tribe until the Iowa Project. And the land we're on right now was part of that, one of the green allotment that was purchased to put into U.S. Trust. And the tribe didn't have any land as a tribe until that time period.
That's interesting.
Within our own reservation.
Mm-hmm. Has the tribe made efforts to regain some of the land over the years?
Yeah, I would say that the casino, the main purpose of the casino has been to get money to buy back land as we could. Of course, non-Indians often think Indian casinos means that you're rich, which we are not. So they always jack up the price even beyond fair market value. So it's been hard to buy back our land because they always want more than what it's worth, and we can't always pay that.
Yeah.
So that's been the way we've been getting it back, just bit by bit.
So how did you meet up or learn about or start working with the Nature Conservancy?
So the Nature Conservancy was gifted a chunk of land by Ray Schulenberg in the 1980s. The Rouleau Bluffs Preserve, he called it, because Rouleau was probably the closest town to where it's at. Although we tend to think of Rouleau more like Nebraska and White Cloud is Kansas. But anyway, he had been a young guy from Falls City. He kind of wanted to live like Thoreau out on the land. And he bought a place over here on the reservation, one of the little hollows, and one of the tribal members kind of helped him find it. And he lived there for a few years, and then he discovered even Thoreau would have had to have money. And so he did the best he could, and he'd come back often. He became kind of one of the fathers of prairie restoration, I know. And just that legacy of trying to do that is part of what Rouleau Bluffs is about. And then later on, they bought another piece of property that they added onto that to try to do some prairie restoration.
The Nature Conservancy?
Yeah,
bought
the
that?
Nature
Okay.
Conservancy bought that. And then how we got involved was because they had regimes to manage it by fire, to replenish the grasses and chase back the woody growth and things like that. So we've always kind of been partners with them. A lot of tribal members help them do the burns and everything. So I think what they discovered was it was just the management was getting too far. There was just, it would be easier, and they had a good relationship with the tribe, and they just started exploring that.
Mm-hmm. When did this all start, this conversation?
My predecessor, Alan Kelly, who was the vice chair, was probably the most active moving that forward. And I would say that it probably wasn't until 2013, 14, somewhere in there, that it was serious. Who knows? I don't know if people were mumbling about it before, but that's kind of when it got serious.
All right. So how did that come up, or how did that play out, I guess?
How it played out.
Yeah.
Now, the tribe needs to put things into trust in order to, so we don't have to pay taxes on those things on our own reservation. And so we have to always kind of look and see how is that going to fit in. Is it going to be income producing property? And that is less worrisome that we have to, but if it's a place that doesn't produce any money, then, and they're going to be taxing you on it, we just, like anybody else, we're like, why should we have to pay taxes on our own reservation lands? So in 2016, the first tract of property called the Bachman property, which was the part that they bought later on for cattle, used to cattle graze and try to do some prairie restoration and things like that, that they did that first transfer. And part of the reason was because it was not the original property, which was Schulenberg's property, which had a lot more strict conservation easement requirements, things like no hunting, no motorized vehicles, things like that. And if you know the countryside, people like the ATVs. So the first tract had less restrictions, and so we could move forward with that. We could still manage, we could still do all the things the Nature Conservancy wanted us to, but not only is the BIA reluctant to take on property that other people tell them what to do, what can or cannot be done, because the BIA's interest generally is to make money off of property for tribes. The tribe itself, we're a tribe of people that like to go hunting, like to go four-wheeling, like to do all the country stuff that people like to do. And so there was just a hesitation to take on something that would be more hassle. That's why they moved forward with the one tract in 2016, and the other one just kind of stepped back from it for a while.
How big was that first tract?
Let's see, it was 247, I think, is how many acres the Schulenberg tract is, I think. I'd have to look because I don't know off the top of my head. The total is 444. So I don't know, I'll have to get back to you on that. I can't remember.
Okay.
I saw something in an article that said 160 acres.
That could be, it looked like it was about 4 sections.
Okay.
Or 4 quarter sections, you know what I mean. There was that. So after that one, we still, a couple of us, like I'm much more of a conservationist kind of person. I worked for the Park Service briefly as a cultural landscape historian, and I've always been, into the woods, So I kept wanting to happen. 2019, my predecessor, Alan Kelly, decided not to run for re-election, and I saw my priority being conservation and culture. I thought, self-defense, I have to run, because you never know who gets in there, and they may have no interest in our language and our culture and our land and stuff, and that may be totally all about economic development or business and stuff, and then the land generally, is at risk for that sort of thing. So I ran. I won with a real close margin. But I did win. That was 2019 fall. And they told me all you have to do is go meet in the afternoons on Wednesday. And then the pandemic hit. And life changed entirely. And we were meeting every day. I was the FEMA guy, too, for a while, doing all the PPE stuff and all that. So, yeah, so the fact, trial by fire, really. But it did give us some opportunities. When there's great challenges and great events, that gives you a chance to maybe do things a little bit differently. And our casino was closed for 3 or 4 months. And the issue, the Nature Conservancy had brought it up again in 2019. And so we took it on in 2019, is when November, I think it was, we did the official transfer. And we moved it forward. But that was just in the first just before the pandemic hit. And when we didn't know what we were going to do with it. We didn't know what we were going to do with it because the tribe is like, well, can we go in there? What can we do? Can we gather wood? And all those things had conservation easement things that were restricted from a lot of those activities. So it was kind of like just in limbo somewhat about what we were going to be able to do. So I'd always thought about national parks, and I thought, we're a sovereign nation. In fact, our treaties talk about the Iowa Nation, as well as the Iowa Tribe of Indians. And I thought, how can we do this? Because I had, in 2013, when I took on this job as TIPO, I'd spent 6 weeks of that first year standing out there defending where they were going to build a bridge against some parts of the site that were going to get affected, some large cottonwoods, some other things. And every day I had to stand out there because if you didn't, they might take down something you didn't want them to. And then it was faced again on the Leary site, a National Historic Landmark, that they wanted to re-terrace some of the hill, of the burial hill, for cattle damage and stuff that they had. And I said, no, you can repair some of the damage, but you don't re-terrace it. So I had to fight people on that. So, everything's fight all the time.
So what's that unusual then, the relationship with the Nature Conservancy? It doesn't sound like that was fight. It sounds like maybe there's more cooperation.
There was, and the Nature Conservancy is conservation-minded. And so there's a natural connection there. I come from a state where ranchers and farmers and everything run everything. Montana. Yeah. And it is going through a bunch of stuff now. And I know, because I'm the first one to graduate from high school in my family and everything. Well, my mom did. But the first one to kind of go through all this. So I understand a working landscape. I get that. But I also know I've seen it nibbled away from the 1980s, and it's not what it was even back then. And I thought we have to use our minds in some other way to come up with something. And I thought, you know what? We've got the National Historic Landmark. We're on the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. Now we have this conservation, biologically unique landscape. We have all these resources, and it could be a way to protect it, as well as not only protect it and bring people here sometimes to visit and learn about us, but to connect us to the land in a different way. Because our language, our culture, we have a powwow every year, third weekend of September, but we don't have schools that we could teach our language through. People are scattered to the different counties. It's really, a lot of our identity has been eroded. In order to survive in this non-Indian kind of farming culture, I've seen it generation by generation go more and more from acculturation to assimilation. And I would say this is our last chance. So I'm going to also try to push together a language resolution, because there's no first language native speakers anymore left. It's like a Wampanoag. It's like sleeping language, And I'm one of the few that speak much of it at all, but I'm not a first language speaker. There aren't any. So, conserve the land, but it can't be frozen in time. People have to find a new way to live with it and conserve it. And what some young ladies in Six Nations on the Facebook said, two-eye seeing, which is the best of traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous ways of knowing, but also the best of Western science. So maybe some of the management and the microscope work and the soil health and all that kind of stuff, along with traditions about how you treat animals and the plants and the gathering, rules that if you see only 4 plants, just take one, and that's only if you need it. Because our own people sometimes don't even hold to those old ways of conservation anymore. People just say, that guy over there is going to take everything. I think I better take it before he does. And we got to change that or we're all doomed.
Great. What sort of hopes do you have for the land that was donated?
At first, my hopes was just to have it last for another 100 years or so, to give people a chance to have some area that they can go in the woods and get lost and just be around the trees and learn some plants and things. But I know that's not going to work if you try to separate the people from that. You can't just hold it in a capsule. It's not big enough here. It's not like Wyoming or something. People have to learn a new way of living with the land so that 1,000 years from now, because that's the difference between us and anybody else who's not Indian. If things don't go right in your place, if you go broke, you can move. You can sell out. We can't. We're going to be here until whatever happens at the very end. So it's different that way.
So I read recently that you are forming a tribal national park, which you already mentioned. Mm-hmm. It will be the largest in the nation, in the U.S. nation. Tell us more about that.
So when I was looking for a way to conserve and preserve Leary Tribal, the Leary National Historic Landmark, which is one of our ancestral villages from about 1200 to 1400, and how to preserve the land that the Nature Conservancy had given to us. There's another little chunk of land, which is my family's allotment that the tribe owned, and could be a hub for trails, and it has the 1854 monument on it where they surveyed Kansas and Nebraska. And then we're also in the middle of gaining our historic mission back, which is down by Highland. So I thought, how do you put all these pieces together? And Iowa Tribal National Park seemed to be the way to make it make sense, right? The people click with that. They know what national parks are. But we're not under the National Park Service. We handle things ourselves. We have our own sovereignty. That means we don't have taxes. We don't have that so we're going to have to figure out the money part, and see how that works. But that's how it kind of came to be, is to do that. Now, as far as the term, I looked up, I thought, are there other ones that did national parks? And I know the Navajo, I know the Ute, I know the there's several folks up in Canada and Alaska. They have their preserves. And then I saw that it was Red Cliff, Frog Bay Tribal National Park was the first one. And I thought, okay, so there's precedent. I can use that. It's not something that you're only one and they're going to fight you on it. It exists. I could show that. That's a model. And the other thing is that it was, I think the Tribal National Park at that time was 80-something acres or whatever, and ours already would be over 400 acres. So that's why. And it's like everything else, to get people's imagination so they agree with it, is to say Iowa Tribal National Park. And it's the second tribal national park by that name I always specified. And it is the largest by acreage. It doesn't mean it always will be. It doesn't mean it's bigger than the mountains that the Utes and stuff have. But by that name, in our part of the country, we don't. Kansas is over 98% privately owned. We don't have a lot of public lands at all. And people have been what they call pushing trees and getting rid of the forests left and right because the land is so valuable. And it's urbanizing around Kansas City. So we can't do the big thing, but we can do the small thing. As far as my idea, I worked in Hawaii for a number of years in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And volcanoes, when they erupt, the lava flows over the landscape. And everything that's a little bit higher is like water, right? Those are almost like islands. The Hawaiians call those kipuka, which means holes. And what they are is once the lava hardens, those places that still preserved forest and things like that become the seed banks. So the idea of landscape ecology, the idea of rewilding, all these things. So what I also see us is a refugia, just like during the Ice Age. Only it's not ice and it's not lava, it's population that swamped every area. So the thing I'm trying to find out now is how can we take these little small areas that we have, very small areas, but have a multiplier effect connecting them to other areas so that the species can not be isolated. They cannot be isolated. They can just keep on reproducing up and down and finding new mates and gene exchange and all that good stuff.
How far are you along in the process of creating the national park? You have the designation,
Right. We
you have the
designation.
land.
This year we've been studying the trails. We've had several people test some of them and do some GPS work on it, things like that. I hope to have maybe a couple signs up this year. 2025 is the ultimate goal for it to have the official opening, and which is also the anniversary of the Treaty of Prairie du Chien of 1825, which kind of was the first carving up of tribal territories in the Midwest. So it's kind of significant to us, 2025. Every year we hope to have new things happen. We're also trying to do an agritourism thing here as part of regenerative ag that we're doing. Greenhouse in the snow, that kind of stuff, as well as the hemp that we're growing as well. And so 2025 is kind of the goal, and it's already 2021, so yikes.
Coming up, yeah. Great.
I would love to know more about the agritourism. What does that involve?
Well, some people talk about dreams about having big factories to employ people and things like that, but in the middle of winter time, a lot of the roads are closed because of ice storms and things like that. So I always think about, instead of trying to bring in something to change the land, what can you do that helps the land be what it is and keeps this quality of life that you want, that you're used to, but just gives more opportunity at the same time. I think that the real key is ecotourism, heritage tourism, and agritourism, which all look at different aspects of the land. We're not going to allow people to come just to go do the usual thing. The Utes, Navos, other folks, they have programs either where there's guides or some sort of companies. We're not going to be anybody's playground. That's not what we're about. If you want to learn about us and our history and our connection to the land, especially for those of us who are a diaspora spread across the country, that a lot of times there's not been something to come back to learn about yourself, to learn about your language. So this program, whether it's about the land itself, ecotourism, or whether it's about the regenerative farming that we do, the agritourism, or whether it's about our history, our culture, the heritage tourism, it's all connected, but it's all about maintaining our agency and our power to tell our own story and to control so things don't happen here like have happened to other national parks. Like Zion got swamped by people, Yosemite is swamped, and we're nothing like that. We don't have those huge vistas and things like that. This is the only thing we have, and we have to take care of it. And that means sometimes there's going to have to be restrictions.
Sure. Well, obviously our project is called Reconciliation Rising, and one of the questions we ask everybody we interview is, do you consider this land donation, this land exchange, an act of reconciliation? Yeah.
I think it was a great act of kindness and justice and reconciliation to make this happen. And what's really wonderful is it isn't just a one and done situation. It is creating a relationship between our tribe and the Nature Conservancy. not only on our own land, but how can we help bring that kind of approach to other parts and other places in the mission field of the Nature Conservancy. Like I said earlier, trying to find ways to connect conservation areas, maybe some of the carbon credit stuff that people do, we can find ways to create connectivity between some of these conservation areas. And because that without connectivity, it's like, unless you're a bird, how are you going to get there and find new mates, right? So I think it's been reconciliation and creating a new, different kind of relationship too.
That's great. You mentioned earlier, before we were recording you, that you'd been at a meeting in Denver and had joined the Bison Trust. What is that, and is that related to your work of conservation here?
Yeah, the ITBC, Intertribal Buffalo Council, is an effort. It was part of a Northern Plains Treaty to bring the buffalo back and to help tribes do that. In particular, a number of tribes from Montana and the Northern Plains signed it first, and there have been people added every year, not just in the classical Plains area, but there are places in Alaska and the Northeast and stuff that have buffalo council members. So we were inducted this time on my birthday, actually June 2nd. So that was pretty cool to have it as a birthday present. I'm the alternate. Elise Towie, who is our treasurer, is the main member, and she's Buffalo Clan, and that's why, because it's proper to do that that way. So yeah, that's what we do, and hopefully the buffalo, I would like to see it being part of that prairie restoration effort. It costs a lot, fencing costs a lot, everything costs a lot, right? But we're also working with our southern Iowa brothers and sisters to create eagle sanctuary up here too. The eagles come and they visit in the wintertime, especially because the Lusk Bluffs Wildlife Refuge is across the river there, and they hunt a lot of the waterfowl. So we get a lot of bald eagles in the wintertime. But the southern Iowas have a thing called the Gray Snow Eagle House, and they take injured eagles and other raptors and release the ones they can and take care of the ones they can't. So we're trying to work with them to develop a sanctuary over here, so so that the land is healed as part of the animals, as part of the land too. They're not separated. And I also have kind of a desire to have a wildlife rehabilitation clinic here too for things that have gotten hit by cars or whatever. We have started to see some animals come back. There have been sightings of things like otters and cougars and things like that. So we're just really happy. Every once in a while, I hope that we can restore the wetlands too down by the river, but those places have all been drained as super attractive to agriculture. So bit by bit, right?
Well, is there anything you want to mention or talk about that we haven't asked about?
I can't think anything, but yeah, if unless we come up with something, I mean, we can talk about anything. You can record and use whatever you want to do, but I don't have anything like formal I want to say. I think language, I would say that part of what we're doing here is TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and bringing that back to us, bringing our language back to us. And this Friday, we're going to have a meeting of people who are specialists in TEK and park planning and recreation, and hear what they have to say about how can we move this thing forward. What are the steps?
It's really exciting to hear what you're doing.
It really is. Yeah, definitely.
I wish I had a lot of money and could just give you a lot of money.
How can
My
people
husband's
help?
sitting over there like, don't give her any ideas.
Well, if people want to help, and if they want to send donations, they can certainly send to the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and put it specifically that's for the Iowa Tribal National Park Project.
Great.
But anyway, we're also interested in people who have specialty areas in like knowing about herpetology or We're looking for ways to learn how people have an experience with the forest bathing, where you walk through and the different ways to. I also we have a group on Facebook, Iowa Tribal National Park, you can check out. And there's other things that are kind of branching off to that too, but I think that's probably enough for now. I can't think of anything other great.
Wow.
Great. Well, should we wrap it up?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much, Lance.
Thank you so much for your time,
Sure.
Lance. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to all the things you're doing here and kind of seeing these things come to fruition. And hopefully we can return sometime and talk about what you've done.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Lance Foster, Vice Chair and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, is creating one of the first national parks on tribal land after the Nature Conservancy returned over 400 acres to his nation. It will be a place for members of the Iowa diaspora to return to their roots and a site where non-natives can learn more about the Iowa Nation.
Thank you for joining us on Reconciliation Rising, a project dedicated to natives and non-natives confronting our past and reimagining our future. If you'd like to learn more about our project, please check out our website at www.reconciliationrising.org.